Across the glittering courts of 18th century France, Louis XV fathered a remarkably large and complex family. 10 legitimate children with Queen Marie Leszczyńska, plus several unofficial or quietly supported offspring born to mistresses across his long reign. Some of these children shaped European dynasties. Some retreated into convents or political factions. Others died so young that their presence is recorded only in baptismal registers and brief court notices. And a few, never formally acknowledged, lived in the shadows of the monarchy, their lives unfolding along carefully constructed paths designed to protect both them and the throne. This documentary follows each child in strict chronological order, completing their full life stories, from birth and upbringing to marriages, careers, descendants, and long-term legacies. It is a clear, neutral, historically grounded account of what happened to every known child of Louis XV, both legitimate and illegitimate, and how each contributed, quietly or prominently, to the world the Bourbon monarchy left behind. The royal family structure we will examine includes 10 legitimate children born to Queen Marie Leszczyńska between 1727 and 1737, one officially acknowledged illegitimate son, and several additional children widely accepted by historians as bearing royal blood. Each received different levels of recognition, support, and opportunity, yet all played roles in the complex web of European aristocracy that would ultimately face the revolutionary upheavals of the late 18th century. Louise Elisabeth of France was born on August 14, 1727, at the Palace of Versailles, the first child of Louis XV and Queen Marie Leszczyńska. Her birth held particular significance as she was a twin, born just minutes before her sister Anne Henriette. As the eldest child of the royal couple, Louise Elisabeth immediately occupied a position of considerable importance within the French court hierarchy, though her status as a daughter rather than a son meant she could never inherit the throne directly. The timing of her birth coincided with a period of relative stability for the French monarchy. Louis XV was 27 years old and had been ruling independently for several years following his childhood regency. The marriage to Marie Leszczyńska, daughter of the deposed Polish king Stanisław I, had been politically motivated but proved personally successful in its early years, producing children with remarkable regularity. Louise Elisabeth's position as the firstborn daughter carried both privilege and responsibility. From birth, she was understood to be a potential diplomatic asset, destined for a marriage that would strengthen France's international alliances. The court recognized her intelligence and strong personality from an early age, qualities that would later serve her well in the complex political landscape of 18th century European nobility. The early education of Louise Elisabeth followed the traditional pattern established for French princesses, combining religious instruction, languages, literature, and the social graces required for court life. She was placed under the care of the Marquise de Ventadour, the royal governess, who had previously overseen the education of Louis XV himself. This connection ensured that Louise Elisabeth received instruction that aligned with her father's own educational background and values. Her curriculum included Latin, Italian, and Spanish, languages essential for the international marriages expected of French princesses. She demonstrated particular aptitude for history and geography, subjects that would prove invaluable during her later political career in Italy. Dancing, music, and drawing completed her artistic education, while religious instruction emphasized the Catholic faith that remained central to Bourbon identity. Unlike her younger sisters, Louise Elisabeth showed early signs of political interest and ambition. Contemporary accounts describe a princess who listened carefully to court discussions and asked perceptive questions about European affairs. This intellectual curiosity, combined with her natural confidence, marked her as potentially influential in whatever marriage alliance France might arrange for her. The court environment of the 1730s provided Louise Elisabeth with extensive exposure to diplomatic protocols and international visitors. She observed firsthand the delicate balance of power that characterized European politics and absorbed lessons about the role of marriage in cementing political alliances. These experiences would prove formative when she later assumed her own political responsibilities. The marriage negotiations for Louise Elisabeth began in earnest during the mid-1730s, as European powers sought to resolve ongoing territorial disputes through diplomatic marriages. The War of the Polish Succession had recently concluded, and France sought to strengthen its position in Italy while maintaining good relations with Spain. These political considerations led to the arrangement of Louise Elisabeth's marriage to Infante Philip of Spain, younger son of King Philip V. The marriage contract, signed in 1739, represented a significant diplomatic achievement for France. Infante Philip was heir to the Duchy of Parma through his mother, Elizabeth Farnese, meaning that Louise Elisabeth would become Duchess of Parma upon her marriage. This arrangement gave France indirect influence over a strategically important Italian state while strengthening the Bourbon family alliance that linked the French and Spanish crowns. Louise Elisabeth married Infante Philippe on August 26, 1739, in a ceremony at Versailles that demonstrated the full splendor of the French court. The wedding festivities lasted several days and included elaborate entertainments designed to impress foreign ambassadors and strengthen France's international prestige. Following the ceremony, the couple remained at Versailles for several months before departing for Spain and eventually Italy. The transition to her new role required Louise Elisabeth to adapt to Spanish court customs while preparing for her eventual responsibilities in Parma. She spent time at the Spanish court learning the language and protocols that would govern her future diplomatic relationships. Her intelligence and linguistic abilities facilitated this transition, earning her respect from Spanish nobility and her new in-laws. Louise Elisabeth became Duchess of Parma in 1748 following the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, which concluded the War of Austrian Succession and confirmed her husband's succession to the duchy. As Duchess, she immediately demonstrated the political acumen and ambition that had characterized her personality since childhood. She sought to modernize Parma's administration while using her position to influence broader European politics. Her political strategy involved maintaining strong connections with France while asserting Parma's independence within the complex web of Italian politics. She corresponded regularly with her father Louis XV and with key French ministers, providing intelligence about Italian affairs and advocating for policies that would benefit both Parma and France. This dual loyalty sometimes created tensions, but generally served her duchy well. The Duchess implemented significant administrative reforms in Parma, including improvements to the judicial system and encouragement of economic development. She attracted intellectuals and artists to her court, creating a cultural center that enhanced Parma's prestige throughout Italy. These achievements demonstrated her capability as a ruler and strengthened her political influence beyond the duchy's borders. Her relationship with other Italian rulers proved complex, as she balanced cooperation with competition for influence. She maintained particularly important connections with the Habsburg rulers in neighboring territories, understanding that Parma's survival depended on skillful diplomacy with all major European powers. Her French heritage provided both advantages and disadvantages in these relationships. Louise Elisabeth's marriage to Infante Philip produced 3 children who would carry forward both Bourbon and Farnese bloodlines. Their eldest daughter, Isabella, born in 1741, would later marry Joseph II of Austria, creating another important dynastic link between the Habsburg and Bourbon families. Their son Ferdinand became Duke of Parma after his father's death, continuing the family's rule over the duchy. The family's third child, Maria Louisa, born in 1751, would eventually marry Charles IV of Spain, making her Queen of Spain and ensuring that Louise Elisabeth's descendants would occupy one of Europe's most important thrones. These marriages demonstrate the continuing significance of dynastic politics in 18th century Europe and Louise Elisabeth's success in positioning her children advantageously. Louise Elisabeth's health began declining in the mid-1750s, possibly due to the physical demands of childbearing and the stress of governing Parma during a period of ongoing European conflicts. She suffered from recurring fevers and respiratory ailments that contemporary medicine could not effectively treat. Despite her illness, she continued to participate actively in political affairs until shortly before her death. She died on December 6, 1759, at the age of 32, having established herself as one of the most politically significant of Louis XV's children. Her death represented a loss not only to her immediate family, but to the broader network of European diplomacy in which she had played an important role. The Duchy of Parma passed to her husband, who continued to rule until his own death, when their son Ferdinand inherited the title. Her legacy extends through multiple European royal lines as her descendants occupied thrones in Spain, Austria, and various Italian states. The political alliances she helped create and maintain contributed to the stability of the Bourbon-Habsburg relationship that characterized much of 18th century European diplomacy. Anne Henriette of France was born on August 14, 1727, just minutes after her twin sister Louise Elisabeth, at the Palace of Versailles. As the second of Louis XV's daughters, she occupied a unique position within the royal family. Close enough to power to understand its mechanisms, but freed from the diplomatic marriage obligations that typically constrained eldest daughters. From early childhood, Anne Henriette displayed a personality markedly different from her ambitious twin sister. Where Louise Elisabeth showed political interests and assertive tendencies, Anne Henriette demonstrated artistic inclinations and a preference for quieter pursuits. She excelled in music, particularly keyboard instruments, and showed considerable talent for drawing and painting. These artistic interests would define much of her adult life at court. Contemporary accounts describe Anne Henriette as the more physically attractive of the twins, with the fair complexion and graceful bearing that were prized at Versailles. However, she possessed a gentle, somewhat melancholic temperament that contrasted sharply with the vivacious court atmosphere. This personality difference may have influenced the different paths the twin sisters would ultimately follow. Her education paralleled that of Louise Elisabeth, but with greater emphasis on artistic rather than political subjects. She studied music with leading composers of the day and received instruction in painting from court artists. These pursuits provided her with accomplishments suitable for a princess, while allowing her to develop genuine talents that brought her personal satisfaction. Unlike her sister, Anne Henriette never married, a circumstance that reflected both personal preference and political calculation. During the 1740s, various marriage proposals were considered for her, including potential matches with German princes and Italian nobles. However, none of these negotiations reached fruition, partly due to changing political circumstances and partly due to Anne Henriette's own apparent reluctance to leave France. Her unmarried status allowed Anne Henriette to remain at Versailles, where she became an important figure in court cultural life. She organized musical entertainments and artistic salons that attracted the most talented musicians and artists of the period. These gatherings provided intellectual stimulation for court society while establishing Anne Henriette as a patron of the arts. The princess developed close relationships with several of her younger siblings, particularly serving as a mentor and companion to the daughters who would later be known as mesdames. Her gentle nature and artistic interest made her an ideal confidant for her sisters, and she played an important role in their education and social development. Her relationship with Louis XV appears to have been particularly affectionate. The king valued her artistic accomplishments and often sought her company for intimate family gatherings. Unlike some of his other children, Anne Henriette never challenged royal authority or expressed political opinions that might complicate her father's reign. Anne Henriette's position as an unmarried princess living at court gave her unique access to her father during a period when Louis XV was increasingly withdrawing from public ceremonial duties. She often accompanied him on hunting expeditions and participated in the smaller, more private entertainments that the king preferred as he aged. These interactions suggest a genuine affection between father and daughter. The princess also served as an unofficial cultural advisor to the king, recommending artists and musicians for court appointments and helping to plan entertainments for visiting dignitaries. Her artistic knowledge and refined taste made her valuable in these capacities, and she appears to have enjoyed the responsibility and recognition that came with such roles. During the early 1750s, Anne Henriette's health began to decline. She suffered from what contemporary physicians described as consumption, likely tuberculosis, which gradually weakened her constitution. The disease progressed slowly, allowing her to continue her court duties for several months while growing progressively weaker. She died on February 10, 1752, at the age of 24. surrounded by her immediate family at Versailles. Her death deeply affected Louis XV, who had lost his most artistically accomplished child and one of his closest companions among his daughters. The court mourned not only a princess but a talented artist who had contributed significantly to Versailles' cultural life. Anne Henriette left no direct descendants, but her influence on court artistic life and her role in her siblings' education contributed to the cultural sophistication of the next generation of French royalty. Her artistic collections were distributed among her surviving sisters, helping to maintain the artistic traditions she had fostered. Marie-Louise of France was born on July 28, 1728, the third daughter of Louis XV and Queen Marie Leszczyńska. Her birth came just 11 months after the twins Louise Elisabeth and Anne Henriette, demonstrating the remarkable fertility that characterized the royal couple's early married life. As the third princess in rapid succession, Marie-Louise's birth represented both the blessing of continued royal offspring and the challenge of providing for multiple daughters in an age when marriages required substantial dowries. The infant princess appeared healthy at birth and was baptized with the usual court ceremonies befitting a child of France. She was placed in the care of the royal nurses and governesses who managed the increasingly crowded royal nursery at Versailles. Contemporary accounts suggest that she developed normally during her first years, reaching the typical milestones expected of royal children. Marie-Louise's early years coincided with a period of relative peace and prosperity for France. The War of the Polish Succession had not yet begun, and the court could focus on domestic celebrations rather than military concerns. The presence of three young princesses provided hope for valuable future marriage alliances while demonstrating the vitality of the Bourbon dynasty. The little princess lived during the height of the elaborate court ceremonies that characterized Versailles under Louis XV. Even as an infant and toddler, she would have been present at various court functions appropriate to her age, allowing courtiers to observe the royal children and speculate about their future roles in European politics. Marie-Louise's life was cut short by illness in 1733, when she was only 5 years old. Contemporary sources provide limited details about the specific nature of her final illness, referring generally to fever and weakness that characterized many childhood diseases of the period. The lack of modern medical knowledge meant that even royal children remained vulnerable to diseases that would later become preventable or treatable. Her death on February 19, 1733, marked the first loss among Louis XV's legitimate children and provided a sobering reminder of the mortality that shadowed even the most privileged families of the 18th century. The court observed appropriate mourning protocols, though the grief was perhaps less intense than it would later become when older, more established children died. The loss of Marie-Louise may have influenced the increasing religious devotion that Queen Marie Leszczyńska began to display during the 1730s. The Queen had already demonstrated strong Catholic faith, but the death of a child often intensified royal religious practices as parents sought spiritual comfort and divine protection for their surviving children. For Louis XV, the death represented his first experience with the loss of a legitimate child, an event that would unfortunately be repeated several times during his reign. The king's response to such losses typically involved temporary withdrawal from court life and increased attention to the welfare of his surviving children. Marie-Louise left no lasting legacy beyond her brief presence in the royal family and the sorrow her death caused her parents and siblings. However, her short life serves as a reminder of the vulnerability that characterized childhood in the 18th century, even among the highest ranks of society. Her death also emphasized the importance of the surviving children in carrying forward the Bourbon dynasty. Louis, Dauphin of France, was born on September 4, 1729, at the Palace of Versailles, the long-awaited male heir to Louis XV and Queen Marie Leszczyńska. His birth was celebrated throughout France with particular enthusiasm, as the arrival of a dauphin secured the succession of the Bourbon dynasty and ended concerns about the continuation of the royal line that had persisted since Louis V's own precarious childhood. The infant prince's birth was announced by cannon fire from the Invalides and celebrated with Te Deums in churches across the kingdom. As heir apparent to the French throne, Louis immediately assumed the title of Dauphin, a designation that carried specific constitutional significance and marked him as the most important of all the royal children. His birth also elevated the status of Queen Marie Leszczyńska, who had fulfilled her primary dynastic obligation. From the moment of his birth, the Dauphin's life was structured around his future role as King of France. Special protocols governed his upbringing, education, and daily routine, all designed to prepare him for the enormous responsibilities he would eventually inherit. The court understood that in the Dauphin they were observing the future sovereign of one of Europe's most powerful nations. The timing of his birth coincided with France's growing involvement in European conflicts that would characterize much of the 18th century. The Dauphin would spend his formative years during the War of the Polish Succession and the War of Austrian Succession, conflicts that would shape his understanding of international politics and military strategy. The Dauphin's education was overseen by some of France's most distinguished scholars and clerics, beginning with his formal instruction at age 7 under the guidance of Cardinal de Fleury, Louis XV's chief minister. The curriculum emphasized classical languages, history, geography, mathematics, and political philosophy, subjects considered essential for effective kingship. Military science and strategy received particular attention as the Dauphin would be expected to lead French forces in future conflicts. His tutors included the Bishop of Mirepoix and later the Duke of La Vauguyon, both chosen for their combination of intellectual ability and political reliability. These men shaped not only the Dauphin's knowledge, but also his political and religious attitudes, emphasizing traditional Catholic monarchy and the divine right of kings that underpinned Bourbon legitimacy. Contemporary accounts describe the Dauphin as intelligent but somewhat reserved, lacking the natural charisma that had characterized some previous French princes. He demonstrated genuine interest in intellectual pursuits and showed particular aptitude for history and political theory. However, he also displayed a tendency toward melancholy and introspection that concerned some courtiers who hoped for a more obviously dynamic future king. His religious education was extensive and appears to have made a lasting impression on his character. The Dauphin developed strong Catholic convictions that influenced his political views and personal conduct throughout his life. This religious commitment would later affect his relationships with various court factions and his approach to the religious controversies that periodically disrupted French politics. The Dauphin's first marriage was arranged in 1745 to Princess Teresa Rafaela of Spain, daughter of Philip V and Elizabeth Farnese. This alliance strengthened the family compact between France and Spain while providing the Dauphin with a bride whose Habsburg connections through her mother offered additional diplomatic advantages. The marriage appeared initially successful, and the couple seemed genuinely fond of each other. Princess Teresa Rafaela's pregnancy in 1746 raised hopes for the next generation of Bourbon heirs. However, both she and her infant daughter died in childbirth in July 1746, devastating the Dauphin and creating a new succession crisis. The loss of his first wife and child profoundly affected the Dauphin's personality, contributing to the melancholy that would characterize his later years. His second marriage in 1747 was to Princess Marie-Joseph of Saxony, daughter of Augustus III of Poland and Elector of Saxony. This marriage proved both personally happier and dynastically more successful than his first. Marie-Joseph adapted well to French court life and proved to be an excellent partner for the sometimes difficult Dauphin. The second marriage produced 8 children, 3 of whom would become kings of France. The future Louis XVI was born in 1754, followed by Louis Stanislas, the future Louis XVIII in 1755, and Charles Philippe, the future Charles X in 1757. 3 daughters, Clotilde, Elizabeth, and Marie, completed the family, ensuring the continuation of the Bourbon line for another generation. As heir to the throne, the Dauphin occupied a unique position in French politics, expected to remain loyal to his father while developing his own understanding of governance. He attended council meetings when appropriate and received briefings on state affairs, gradually assuming greater responsibility as Louis XV increasingly focused on his personal interests rather than detailed administration. The Dauphin's political views reflected his traditional religious education and his study of French history. He supported strong royal authority and opposed the growing influence of Enlightenment philosophy that challenged traditional monarchy. His position sometimes put him at odds with court intellectuals and progressive ministers, but they aligned well with the conservative elements that remained influential at Versailles. His relationship with his father appears to have been respectful but somewhat distant. Louis XV was not naturally inclined toward close personal relationships with his children, and the Dauphin's serious personality may have made intimate conversation difficult. However, the king trusted his son's judgment on many matters and gradually increased his involvement in governmental affairs. The Dauphin's health began declining in the early 1760s, possibly due to tuberculosis or another chronic respiratory condition. His illness progressed slowly, allowing him to continue his official duties while growing progressively weaker. The prospect of his death created considerable anxiety at court, as it would leave young princes as the next heirs to the throne. The Dauphin died on December 20th, 1765, at the age of 36, predeceasing his father and thus never becoming King of France. His death represented a significant dynastic crisis, as it left the succession to his 11-year-old son, the future Louis XVI. This premature death would have profound consequences for the French monarchy, as it meant that Louis XVI would inherit the throne without the benefit of his father's guidance and experience. The Dauphin's death also elevated the importance of his surviving brothers, Louis Stanislas and Charles Philippe, who became closer to the succession than had previously seemed likely. Both would eventually become kings of France during the turbulent period following the French Revolution, demonstrating the continuing importance of the Dauphin's lineage even after the collapse of the Ancien Regime. His children's marriages created connections throughout European royalty. His daughter Clotilde married the future Charles Emmanuel IV of Sardinia, while Elizabeth remained unmarried and would later die during the Revolution. These marriages and relationships ensured that the Dauphin's bloodline would continue to influence European politics long after his death. The Dauphin's political and religious views, transmitted to his children through their education and family traditions, would influence the reactionary policies that characterized the restored Bourbon monarchy after 1815. His son's commitment to traditional monarchy and opposition to revolutionary change reflected lessons learned during their childhood under their father's influence. Most significantly, the Dauphin's legacy lives on through his three sons who became kings of France. Louis XVI, whose inability to manage the revolutionary crisis led to the end of absolute monarchy, Louis XVIII, who presided over the Bourbon Restoration, and Charles X, whose reactionary policies precipitated the 1830 revolution that finally ended the senior Bourbon line's rule over France. Philippe, Duke of Anjou, was born on August 30th, 1730, at the Palace of Versailles, the second son of Louis XV and Queen Marie Leszczyńska. His birth came exactly 1 year after his older brother the Dauphin, demonstrating the continued fertility of the royal couple and providing additional security for the Bourbon succession. As a second son, Philippe was immediately granted the traditional title of Duke of Anjou, a designation that had historically been reserved for younger sons of the royal family. The infant prince's birth was celebrated with appropriate ceremonies, though naturally with less fanfare than had accompanied the arrival of the heir to the throne. Nevertheless, Philippe's existence provided important dynastic insurance, as the death or incapacity of the Dauphin would elevate him to the position of heir apparent. The court understood the significance of having multiple male heirs, particularly given the high rates of infant and childhood mortality that affected even royal families. Philippe's title connected him to a distinguished lineage of French princes who had borne the Anjou designation. Most notably, his great-great-uncle, Philip V of Spain, had been Duke of Anjou before becoming King of Spain, creating the Bourbon dynasty that still ruled France's southern neighbor. This historical connection suggested possible future roles for Philippe in international diplomacy or even as a candidate for foreign thrones. From birth, Philippe's upbringing was designed to prepare him for whatever role circumstances might require. As a younger son, he could expect either to support his brother's eventual reign or potentially to establish his own independent principality through marriage or military achievement. The court maintained careful attention to his development, ensuring that he received education appropriate to his royal status. Philippe's life was tragically brief, lasting only until April 7, 1733, when he died at the age of 2 years and 8 months. Contemporary sources provide limited information about the specific illness that claimed his life, referring generally to fever and weakness that characterized many childhood diseases of the period. The lack of effective medical treatments meant that even royal children remained vulnerable to conditions that would later become preventable. His illness appears to have developed rapidly, giving the court little time to prepare for the loss of another royal child. The death came just weeks after the loss of his sister Marie-Louise, creating a particularly difficult period for Louis XV and Queen Marie Leszczyńska as they faced the deaths of two children in quick succession. The double loss highlighted the precarious nature of 18th century childhood, even among the most privileged families. The court observed appropriate mourning protocols for the young Duke of Anjou, though his youth and brief life meant that his death created less disruption than would later accompany the deaths of older, more established royal children. Nevertheless, the loss represented a significant blow to dynastic security, as it left the Dauphin as the sole surviving male heir of his generation. Felipe's death may have influenced the increasingly religious atmosphere that characterized Queen Marie Leszczyńska's court during the 1730s. The queen sought spiritual comfort for her losses while praying for the protection of her surviving children. The repeated experience of losing young children created an atmosphere of anxiety about the future of the royal family that would persist for many years. For Louis XV, the death of Philippe represented another reminder of the fragility of royal succession and the importance of ensuring the survival of the remaining male heirs. The king's response to such losses typically involved increased attention to the health and welfare of his surviving children, particularly the Dauphin, whose continued survival remained essential to the stability of the monarchy. Adélaïde of France was born on March 23, 1732, at the Palace of Versailles, the fourth daughter of Louis XV and Queen Marie Leszczyńska. Her birth came during a particularly fertile period for the royal couple, as she was born just 18 months after her brother Philippe, and would be followed by three more sisters in rapid succession. As one of the middle children in a large royal family, Adélaïde would carve out a distinctive role for herself through sheer force of personality. From early childhood, Adélaïde displayed a strong will and intelligence that distinguished her from her sisters. Contemporary accounts describe a princess who was not afraid to express her opinions and who showed early signs of the political acumen that would characterize her adult life. Unlike her older sisters, who had either married and left France or died young, Adélaïde would spend most of her life at the French court, becoming one of its most influential female figures. Her survival to adulthood was significant given the high mortality rate among her siblings. By the time she reached maturity, several of her brothers and sisters had died, leaving her as one of the senior surviving children. This position gave her increased importance within the royal family hierarchy and greater influence over family decisions and court politics. Adélaïde's education followed the traditional pattern established for French princesses, but was supplemented by additional political instruction that reflected her obvious interest in governmental affairs. She studied languages, history, and literature while also observing the political discussions that characterized court life. Her teachers recognized her intellectual abilities and encouraged her interest in current events and policy matters. Unlike many of her sisters, Adélaïde never married, a circumstance that reflected both personal choice and political calculation. During the 1750s and 1760s, various marriage proposals were considered for her, including potential matches with German princes and Italian nobles. However, these negotiations never reached successful conclusions, possibly due to changing international circumstances and Adélaïde's own strong preferences about her future. Her unmarried status ultimately allowed Adélaïde to remain at Versailles and develop an influential political role that would have been impossible had she married and moved to another court. Along with her sisters Victoire and Sophie, she became one of the group known as Mesdames, the unmarried royal daughters who formed an important power center within the court hierarchy. Adélaïde emerged as the leader of her sisters and the most politically active of the group. She maintained correspondence with foreign courts and French provincial administrators, keeping herself informed about political developments throughout Europe and France. Her opinions carried weight with various court factions, and ministers often sought her support for their policies. Her relationship with Louis XV evolved from that of dutiful daughter to informal political advisor. The king valued her intelligence and trusted her judgment on many matters, particularly those involving family concerns and court administration. Adelaide's influence extended to appointments, policy discussions, and the complex social dynamics that governed life at Versailles. Adelaide's political importance increased significantly following the death of Louis XV in 1774 and the accession of her nephew Louis XVI. As one of the few surviving children of the previous king, she occupied a unique position as a link between the old and new reigns. Her knowledge of court traditions and political personalities made her valuable to the young king as he established his own approach to governance. During the early years of Louis XVI's reign, Adelaide and her sisters wielded considerable influence over court life and royal family decisions. They were particularly involved in matters concerning the education of the royal children and the maintenance of traditional court ceremonies. Their conservative political views aligned with traditional elements at court, who opposed revolutionary changes in French society. As political tensions increased during the 1780s, Adelaide became increasingly identified with the most conservative elements of the royal family. She opposed concessions to revolutionary demands and supported efforts to maintain traditional royal prerogatives. Her political positions reflected both her personal convictions and her understanding of the historical precedents that governed French monarchy. The outbreak of the French Revolution in 1789 marked the beginning of the end for Adelaide's political influence. Along with her sister Victoire, she emigrated from France in 1791, joining the growing community of French émigrés who opposed the revolutionary government. Their departure represented both a personal choice and a political statement about the incompatibility of traditional monarchy with revolutionary principles. Adelaide spent her final years in exile, moving between various Italian cities and maintaining connections with other French émigrés and foreign courts that opposed the French Revolution. She continued to correspond with surviving members of the royal family and to advocate for the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy. Her exile was marked by financial difficulties and declining health, as the revolutionary government had confiscated the properties that had previously supported her lifestyle. She died on February 27, 1800, in Trieste, at the age of 67, having outlived most of her siblings and witnessed the complete transformation of the France she had known. Her death occurred during the Consulate period, when Napoleon Bonaparte was consolidating his power, making restoration of the old monarchy seem increasingly unlikely. Adelaide left no direct descendants, as she had never married. However, her political influence and her role in maintaining traditional court culture had significant impact on the generation of royal family members who would eventually return to France after Napoleon's defeat. Her nephew, Louis XVIII, who became king in 1814, had been influenced by her strong monarchist convictions and her opposition to political compromise with revolutionary forces. Her legacy includes her contribution to the preservation of traditional court culture during a period of rapid political change. Through her correspondence and political activities, she helped maintain connections between scattered French royalists and foreign supporters of monarchy. Her unwavering commitment to traditional principles, while ultimately unsuccessful in preventing revolutionary change, demonstrated the persistence of old regime political culture even in the face of overwhelming opposition. Adelaide's life spans the entire crisis of the French monarchy, from the height of Bourbon power under Louis XV through the revolutionary period that ended absolute monarchy in France. Her story illustrates both the political influence that royal women could wield within traditional monarchy and the limitations of that influence when confronted with fundamental challenges to the monarchical system itself. Victoire of France was born on May 11, 1733, at the Palace of Versailles, the fifth daughter of Louis XV and Queen Marie Leszczyńska. Her birth came during a period of intense royal fertility, as she arrived just 7 weeks after the death of her brother Philippe, Duke of Anjou. As one of the younger daughters in an increasingly large royal family, Victoire's future role was initially unclear, though her survival to adulthood would make her an important figure in later court politics. In 1738, when Victoire was 5 years old, she was sent along with her younger sister Sophie to the Abbey of Fontevraud in the Loire Valley for their education. This decision reflected both practical considerations about managing the large royal family and traditional practices regarding the education of younger royal daughters. The Abbey, one of France's most prestigious religious institutions, had a long history of educating aristocratic women and maintaining connections to the royal court. The years at Fontevraud provided Victoire with a thorough religious education and exposure to the disciplined life that characterized major French abbeys. She studied Latin, religious texts, history, and the domestic arts considered appropriate for women of her station. The abbey environment also instilled habits of order and hierarchy that would later serve her well in court life. Victoire's education at Fontevraud lasted until 1748, when she and Sophie returned to Versailles at ages 15 and 14 respectively. Their return coincided with a period of significant change at court, as Louis XV was becoming increasingly involved with his various mistresses, and the court atmosphere was evolving away from the more religiously conservative tone that had characterized the earlier years of his reign. Following her return to Versailles, Victoire joined her sisters Adélaïde and Sophie in forming the group that became known as Mesdames, the unmarried royal daughters who remained at court rather than marrying foreign princes. This group would become increasingly important in court politics as they aged and gained influence over their father and later their nephew, Louis XVI. Victoire's personality differed markedly from that of her dominant sister Adélaïde. Contemporary accounts describe her as gentler and less politically assertive, though she shared Adélaïde's conservative political views and strong Catholic faith. She often served as a moderating influence within the family, attempting to resolve conflicts and maintain harmony among the sisters. Her role within the Mesdames involved participating in court ceremonies, maintaining correspondence with various French and foreign nobility, and supporting charitable activities appropriate to her station. Victoire showed particular interest in religious charities and maintained connections with various convents and religious organizations throughout France. These activities reflected both personal devotion and the political importance of royal support for Catholic institutions. The unmarried status of Victoire and her sisters provided them with unusual influence for women of their era, as they remained within their natal family rather than transferring their loyalties to husbands and new households. This situation allowed them to accumulate political knowledge and social connections that married princesses typically could not maintain. As revolutionary tensions increased during the 1780s, Victoire found herself increasingly aligned with the most conservative elements of the royal family. Along with her sisters, she opposed concessions to revolutionary demands and supported efforts to maintain traditional royal prerogatives and social hierarchies. Her political positions reflected both personal conviction and family loyalty to the monarchy that had defined her entire life. The decision to emigrate came in 1791, when Victoire and Adélaïde concluded that remaining in revolutionary France had become impossible. Their departure was carefully planned and executed, though it required them to abandon most of their personal property and the social world that had provided meaning and purpose throughout their lives. The emigration represented both a personal tragedy and a political statement about the incompatibility of their values with revolutionary society. Victoire's years in exile were spent primarily in Italy, where she and Adélaïde maintained a modest court that attracted other French émigrés and supporters of the old regime. They faced constant financial difficulties, as the revolutionary government had confiscated the properties that had previously supported their lifestyle. Their situation was further complicated by the political instability that characterized Italy during the revolutionary and Napoleonic periods. The physical and emotional stresses of exile took a significant toll on Victoire's health. She suffered from various ailments that reflected both the hardships of refugee life and the natural aging process. Despite these difficulties, she maintained her religious devotions and continued to correspond with surviving family members and other émigrés. Victoire died on June 7, 1799, in Trieste, at the age of 66, just 8 months before her sister Adélaïde. Her death occurred during one of the most turbulent periods in European history, as French revolutionary armies continued to reshape the continent while Napoleon Bonaparte was rising to supreme power in France. Her legacy, like that of her sisters, includes her role in maintaining traditional monarchist culture during a period of revolutionary change. Through her charitable works, religious devotions, and political activities, she helped preserve connections between French royalists and the broader European networks that supported traditional monarchy. Her unwavering commitment to the values of the old regime, while ultimately unable to prevent revolutionary transformation, demonstrated the persistence of traditional political culture even under extreme pressure. Sophie of France was born on July 27, 1734, at the Palace of Versailles, the sixth daughter of Louis XV and Queen Marie Leszczyńska. Her birth came during the peak period of the royal couple's fertility, arriving just 2 months after her sister Victoire. As one of the youngest daughters in the large royal family, Sophie's future seemed destined for either religious life or an advantageous marriage that would serve French diplomatic interests. Like her sister Victoire, Sophie was sent to the Abbey of Fontevraud in 1738 for her education, when she was only 4 years old. This early separation from court life shaped her personality and worldview significantly, as she spent her formative years from ages 4 to 14 in the disciplined religious environment of one of France's most prestigious abbeys. The education at Fontevraud provided Sophie with extensive religious instruction, Latin literacy, and training in the domestic arts considered appropriate for aristocratic women. The abbey environment emphasized devotion, discipline, and service, values that would influence Sophie's approach to life throughout her adult years. The experience also created close bonds with her sister Victoire, who shared these formative experiences away from the often chaotic atmosphere of Versailles. Sophie's decade at Fontevraud coincided with significant political and social changes in France. While she was receiving traditional religious education, French society was beginning to experience the intellectual ferment that would eventually contribute to the Enlightenment and revolutionary movements. Her abbey education provided her with a conservative religious foundation that would later put her at odds with many of the social changes occurring in 18th century France. Sophie returned to Versailles in 1748 along with Victoire, rejoining the court at age 14 after a decade of abbey life. Her reintegration into court society proved more difficult than that of her sister, as she had become accustomed to the quiet, ordered life of the abbey and found the complex social dynamics of Versailles somewhat overwhelming. Of all the mesdames, Sophie was the most retiring and least interested in political affairs. She preferred religious devotions, charitable work, and quiet family gatherings to the elaborate court ceremonies and social events that characterized life at Versailles. Her gentle personality and religious inclinations made her beloved by her family, though she wielded little independent political influence. Sophie's health was never robust, and she suffered from various ailments that may have reflected both constitutional weakness and the stress of adapting to court life after her abbey upbringing. Contemporary accounts describe her as frequently ill and often absent from major court functions due to health concerns. Her relationship with her father Louis XV was affectionate but distant, as her quiet personality did not naturally engage the king's attention in the way that her more assertive sisters did. However, Sophie appears to have served as a stabilizing influence within the family, providing emotional support to her sisters and maintaining the religious observances that remained important to the royal household. Sophie died on March 2, 1782, at the age of 47, having lived a quiet but meaningful life dedicated primarily to family and religious devotions. Her death preceded the revolutionary crisis by several years, sparing her the trauma of witnessing the collapse of the social order that had defined her existence. Her legacy lies primarily in her role as a supporting figure within the royal family, providing stability and continuity during a period of significant social change. While she never achieved the political influence of her sister Adelaide or played major roles in international affairs, Sophie's quiet devotion to family and faith represented values that remained important to traditional French monarchy even as they came under increasing challenge from Enlightenment thought and revolutionary politics. Thérèse of France was born on May 16, 1736, at the Palace of Versailles, the seventh daughter of Louis XV and Queen Marie Leszczyńska. Her birth came during what would prove to be the final period of the royal couple's remarkable fertility, as Queen Marie Leszczyńska was now 33 years old and approaching the end of her childbearing years. Thérèse would be followed by only one more sister, Louise, born the following year. The infant princess was baptized with the usual court ceremonies, though by this time the arrival of yet another daughter had become almost routine at Versailles. Nevertheless, each royal birth remained significant for the dynasty, and Therese's survival to childhood would represent another successful addition to the large royal family that Louis XV and Marie Leszczyńska had created. Contemporary sources provide relatively little information about Therese's early years, as she was one of many young children in the royal nursery and had not yet developed the distinctive personality traits that would have attracted specific notice from court chroniclers. She appears to have developed normally during her first years and was healthy enough to participate in age-appropriate court functions and family gatherings. Her early years coincided with the War of Austrian Succession, which occupied much of her father's attention and created an atmosphere of military tension throughout Europe. Despite these external concerns, court life continued with its usual elaborate ceremonies and social functions, providing young Therese with exposure to the complex world of 18th century aristocratic society. Therese's life ended tragically on February 28, 1744, when she was only 7 years old. Contemporary accounts suggest that she died of smallpox, one of the most feared diseases of the 18th century, which claimed victims across all social classes despite the best available medical care. The disease was particularly dangerous for children, and even royal physicians had few effective treatments available. Her death was part of a smallpox outbreak that affected several members of the royal family during the winter of 1743-1744. The disease's appearance at court created considerable anxiety, as it threatened not only individual family members, but the stability of the dynasty itself. The loss of Therese was followed by concerns about other family members who had been exposed to the infection. The court observed appropriate mourning protocols for the young princess, though her youth and the relatively brief period she had spent in public view meant that her death created less disruption than would later accompany the deaths of older, more established royal children. Nevertheless, the loss represented another painful reminder of the mortality that shadowed even the most privileged families. For Louis XV and Queen Marie Leszczyńska, Therese's death marked another in the series of child losses that would characterize their family experience. The repeated deaths of young children created an atmosphere of anxiety about the royal family's future and may have contributed to the increasingly religious tone that characterized the Queen's approach to court life during the 1740s. Therese left no lasting individual legacy beyond her brief presence within the royal family and the grief her death caused her parents and siblings. However, her short life serves as another reminder of the vulnerability that characterized childhood in the 18th century, when diseases like smallpox could claim even royal children despite the best care available at the time. Her death also contributed to the complex emotional dynamics within the royal family, as surviving children lived with constant awareness of their own mortality. Louise of France was born on July 15, 1737, at the Palace of Versailles, the eighth and youngest daughter of Louis XV and Queen Marie Leszczyńska. Her birth marked the end of the remarkable period of royal fertility that had produced 10 children in just over a decade. As the youngest of the legitimate children, Louise would enjoy certain advantages of being the cherished baby of the family while also facing the uncertainty that characterized the futures of younger royal daughters. Unlike many of her older sisters, Louise was not sent away for abbey education during her early childhood. This decision may have reflected both parental attachment to their youngest child and changing attitudes about education within the royal family. Instead, she remained at Versailles, receiving instruction from private tutors while remaining closely connected to court life and family dynamics. Louise's upbringing during the 1740s coincided with significant changes in French society and court culture. The influence of Enlightenment thinking was beginning to affect aristocratic attitudes, while Louis XV's relationships with various mistresses were changing the social atmosphere at Versailles. These developments would shape Louise's understanding of the world and influence her eventual decision to pursue religious life. Her education followed traditional patterns for royal daughters, but was supplemented by exposure to the religious devotions that remained important to Queen Marie Leszczyńska despite the increasingly secular tone of court life. Louise demonstrated particular aptitude for religious studies and showed early signs of the spiritual inclinations that would later define her adult life. Louise's decision to enter religious life was unusual among French royal daughters, who typically either married foreign princes or remained at court as influential spinsters. Her choice reflected both personal spiritual conviction and perhaps a desire to escape the complex political and social pressures that characterized life at Versailles during the mid-18th century. In 1770, at the age of 33, Louise shocked the court by announcing her intention to become a Carmelite nun. This decision required papal approval due to her royal status and created considerable discussion throughout European high society. Many contemporaries questioned whether a royal princess should abandon her worldly responsibilities to pursue purely religious goals. The process of entering the convent was complex and required extensive negotiations between the royal family, church authorities, and the Carmelite order. Louise had to renounce her royal prerogatives and the substantial income that supported her courtly lifestyle. Her decision also required her to separate herself from family members and the social world that had defined her existence. On April 11, 1770, Louise formally entered the Carmelite convent of Saint-Denis, taking the religious name Sister Thérèse de Saint-Augustin. The ceremony marking her entry into religious life was attended by members of the royal family and court, though it represented a definitive break with her previous existence as a princess of France. Louise's life as a Carmelite nun was marked by genuine religious devotion and effective leadership within her religious community. She adapted successfully to the austere lifestyle required by her order, which emphasized prayer, contemplation, and service to others. Her royal background provided her with organizational skills and social connections that proved valuable in convent administration. Within the convent, Louise demonstrated the leadership abilities that had been dormant during her court life. She served in various administrative roles and became known for her wisdom in spiritual matters and her ability to mediate disputes among the sisters. Her royal connections also helped the convent maintain important relationships with aristocratic patrons and church authorities. The Revolutionary period created significant challenges for Louise and her religious community. The new government's hostility toward traditional religious institutions threatened the convent's existence and the safety of its inhabitants. Louise's royal birth made her particularly vulnerable to revolutionary persecution, as she represented both aristocratic privilege and religious conservatism. Despite these dangers, Louise chose to remain with her religious community rather than flee France, like many of her family members. Her decision reflected both her religious commitments and her sense of responsibility toward the other nuns who depended on her leadership. This choice required considerable personal courage as it placed her at risk of arrest and execution. Louise died on December 23, 1787, at the age of 50, just 2 years before the outbreak of the French Revolution that would transform French society and destroy the monarchy into which she had been born. Her death occurred peacefully within the convent, surrounded by her religious sisters, and having achieved the spiritual goals that had motivated her departure from court life. Her legacy within the Catholic Church has proven remarkably durable. Louise's reputation for holiness and her sacrificial choice to abandon worldly privilege for religious service impressed both contemporaries and later generations. The Catholic Church eventually recognized her exceptional spiritual life through the process of beatification, granting her the title Venerable. The contrast between Louise's choice and the paths followed by her sisters illustrates the different ways that royal women could respond to the constraints and opportunities of 18th century aristocratic life. While her sisters remained engaged with political affairs and court society, Louise found fulfillment through complete dedication to spiritual pursuits. Her example influenced other aristocratic women who sought meaningful alternatives to conventional court life. During a period when Enlightenment thought was challenging traditional religious authority, Louise's genuine spiritual commitment demonstrated the continuing appeal of religious devotion for some members of the educated elite. Louise's story also provides insight into the complex relationship between personal choice and royal obligation in 18th century France. Her successful pursuit of religious life despite family and social pressures showed that even royal daughters could, under certain circumstances, define their own life paths, rather than simply accepting roles determined by dynastic politics. Louis-Aimé de Bourbon was born on January 19, 1762, the officially acknowledged illegitimate son of Louis XV and Irène du Buisson de Longpré, a lady-in-waiting to the Dauphin. His birth came during the later years of Louis XV's reign, when the king was 52 years old and had been involved in numerous extramarital relationships that occasionally produced children who required royal attention and support. Unlike many of the king's illegitimate children, Louis Aimé received formal recognition and was legitimized by letters patent, granting him the surname de Bourbon and a place within the extended royal family structure. This recognition reflected both the king's affection for the child and possibly the influence of his mother, who had maintained a discreet but significant relationship with the monarch. The decision to legitimize Louis Aimé followed established French precedents for acknowledging royal bastards while maintaining the clear distinction between legitimate and illegitimate children. He was granted a pension and provisions for his education and future career, though he would never be considered part of the line of succession to the throne. His official status as an acknowledged royal bastard placed Louis Aimé in a unique social position. He was recognized as noble by birth and entitled to certain privileges, but he remained outside the core royal family and would need to establish his own career and social position through personal achievement rather than inherited rank. Louis Aimé's future was directed toward the church, a traditional path for younger sons and illegitimate children of royal families. This decision reflected both practical considerations about his social position and the opportunities that ecclesiastical careers offered for advancement and influence within French society. The church provided a respectable profession that could accommodate his royal connections while avoiding potential complications regarding succession and inheritance. He received excellent education appropriate to his intended ecclesiastical career, studying theology, classical languages, and church law. His royal paternity ensured access to quality tutors and educational resources that would prepare him for senior positions within the French church hierarchy. The expectation was that he would eventually receive appointment to a wealthy abbey or bishopric that would provide both income and social influence. Louis Aimé's ecclesiastical career progressed successfully during the 1770s and early 1780s. He received various minor church appointments and benefices that provided income while he continued his religious education and prepared for more senior responsibilities. His royal connections facilitated these appointments as church leaders sought to maintain good relationships with the monarchy. However, his promising career was cut short by his early death on December 28, 1787, at the age of 25. Contemporary sources provide limited information about the specific cause of his death, though it appears to have been the result of illness rather than accident or violence. His death occurred just months after that of his half-sister Louise, creating a period of multiple losses within the extended royal family. His death came at a particularly turbulent time in French history, just 2 years before the outbreak of the revolution that would transform French society and eliminate many of the institutions that had provided structure and opportunity for people in his position. Had he lived, Louis Aimé might have faced difficult choices about whether to support the revolutionary changes or join the emigration that characterized the response of many traditional aristocrats. The brevity of Louis Aimé's life and career meant that he left little lasting impact on French history or church affairs. However, his story illustrates the complex social arrangements that characterized the old regime's approach to illegitimate royal children, providing them with recognition and opportunity while maintaining clear distinctions between legitimate and illegitimate members of the royal family. Agathe Louise de Saint-André was born around 1754, the daughter of Louis XV and Louise O'Murphy de Boisfait. One of the king's most celebrated mistresses, Louise O'Murphy, often known simply as Morphise, had been installed as royal mistress when she was very young and maintained her relationship with the king for several years during the 1750s. The exact date of Agathe Louise's birth remains somewhat uncertain, as illegitimate royal children were often registered with deliberate vagueness to protect their identities. Her mother, Louise O'Murphy, came from an Irish family that had settled in France and achieved modest prosperity through various court connections. The relationship with Louis XV elevated her social status considerably, though she was eventually displaced by other mistresses as the king's romantic interests shifted. Despite losing her position as official mistress, O'Murphy maintained certain privileges and financial support that extended to her daughter. Agathe Louise was raised away from court to avoid complications that might arise from two obvious royal illegitimate children. She received education appropriate to her social station as the acknowledged but unofficial daughter of the king, including instruction in languages, literature, music, and the social graces that would enable her to marry into the minor nobility or wealthy bourgeoisie. The care taken in arranging Agathe Louise's upbringing reflected the king's continued interest in his illegitimate children and his desire to ensure their future security without creating political complications. Her education and social preparation were designed to enable her to marry advantageously while maintaining discretion about her royal parentage. As Agathe Louise reached marriageable age, arrangements were made for her to marry into the provincial nobility, following the typical pattern for illegitimate royal children. These marriages served multiple purposes. They provided social respectability and financial security for the royal bastards while creating useful connections between the monarchy and the broader nobility. Her marriage appears to have taken place in the early 1770s, though specific details about her husband and the circumstances of the wedding remain limited in historical records. The discretion surrounding these arrangements was intentional, as too much publicity about royal illegitimate children could create social and political complications for the monarchy. Agathe Louise's married life was brief, as she died in 1774 at approximately 20 years of age. Contemporary sources provide little information about the cause of her death, which may have resulted from complications related to childbirth, disease, or accident. The high mortality rates that characterized 18th century life affected even those connected to the royal family. Her early death meant that Agathe Louise had little opportunity to establish herself within French society or to develop the kinds of social and political connections that sometimes allowed illegitimate royal children to achieve significant influence. Her brief life exemplifies the uncertain fate that awaited many of Louis XV's unofficial children, who depended on royal favor and social discretion for their security and advancement. The limited historical record surrounding Agathe Louise reflects both the deliberate discretion that characterized arrangements for illegitimate royal children and the relatively minor role that most such children played in broader French history. Her story illustrates the complex social arrangements that the old regime developed to manage the consequences of royal extramarital relationships while maintaining the theoretical integrity of dynastic succession. Agnès Louise de Montreuil was born around 1760. The daughter of Louis XV and Marguerite Hainaut, a woman about whom relatively little is known beyond her connection to the king. The relationship that produced Agnès Louise appears to have been one of the more discreet liaisons of Louis XV's later years, when the king was increasingly concerned about maintaining privacy around his personal relationships while still occasionally acknowledging responsibility for his illegitimate children. The surname de Montreuil was likely chosen to provide Agnès Louise with respectable identity while obscuring her royal parentage. Such surnames were commonly created for illegitimate royal children, often reflecting geographical locations or noble families that had some connection to the royal household. The practice allowed these children to move within French society with appropriate social status while avoiding the complications that might arise from too obvious royal connections. Her mother, Marguerite Hainaut, appears to have been connected to the court through service in some capacity, though specific details about her background and her relationship with the king remain unclear. The discretion surrounding this relationship reflected both the political sensitivity of royal extramarital affairs and the king's desire to avoid the kinds of public scandals that had sometimes surrounded his more prominent mistresses. Agnès Louise's early upbringing was carefully managed to provide her with education and social preparation appropriate to her status as an unofficial royal daughter. She received instruction that would enable her to marry into the minor nobility while maintaining the discretion that was essential to royal policy regarding illegitimate children. Like many daughters of uncertain parentage but obvious noble connections, Agnès Louise was placed in a convent for her education during her teenage years. This arrangement served multiple purposes. It provided excellent education in a protected environment, maintained appropriate social distance from potential scandals, and prepared her for either religious life or advantageous marriage depending on circumstances and opportunities. The convent education included religious instruction, literacy in French and Latin, and training in the domestic arts that were considered essential for women of noble station. This education would enable Agnès Louise to function successfully in whatever role her adult life might require, whether as the wife of a provincial noble or as a religious sister if marriage proved impossible or undesirable. Eventually, arrangements were made for Agnes Louise to marry into the provincial nobility following the pattern established for most illegitimate royal children. These marriages typically involved minor noble families who welcomed the connection to royal blood while accepting the social limitations that accompanied illegitimate birth. Such arrangements usually included modest dowries provided through royal favor. The specific details of Agnes Louise's marriage and later life remain largely unknown, reflecting the successful discretion that characterized these arrangements. Historical records suggest that she married and lived quietly in the provinces, raising children and participating in local noble society without drawing attention to her royal parentage. Her fate during the Revolutionary period is uncertain, though her provincial location and relatively modest social position may have protected her from the persecution that affected more prominent members of the royal family and high nobility. The discretion that had been maintained throughout her life likely served her well during the dangerous years of the 1790s. Anne Louise de la Real was born around 1762, another of Louis XV's illegitimate daughters, whose existence reflects the complex network of relationships that characterized the king's personal life during his later years. Like many of her half-siblings, specific details about her birth and early childhood were deliberately obscured to maintain royal privacy while ensuring that she received appropriate care and education. The surname de la Real appears to have been chosen to provide Anne Louise with respectable noble identity while concealing her royal parentage. Such created surnames were common for illegitimate royal children, often incorporating elements that suggested noble heritage without creating obvious connections to the royal family that might complicate future social relationships. Her upbringing paralleled that of other illegitimate royal daughters, with careful attention to education and social preparation that would enable her to marry into the provincial nobility. This education included languages, literature, music, and domestic arts, providing her with accomplishments appropriate to her anticipated social position while maintaining the discretion essential to royal policy. The management of Anne Louise's childhood and education reflected the sophisticated system that had developed at the French court for handling illegitimate royal children. This system balanced the king's desire to provide for his unofficial offspring with the political necessity of avoiding scandals or complications that might affect the monarchy's reputation or stability. As Anne Louise reached maturity, arrangements were made for her integration into the minor nobility through marriage to a provincial family that would welcome royal connections while accepting the social limitations associated with illegitimate birth. These marriages typically involved modest dowries and careful negotiations to ensure that all parties understood the discrete nature of the relationships involved. Her adult life appears to have followed the quiet pattern typical of illegitimate royal children who successfully integrated into provincial noble society. This involved participation in local social activities, management of modest estates, and raising children who might inherit some social advantages from their royal ancestry while remaining far from the centers of political power. The success of such arrangements depended largely on maintaining appropriate discretion about royal connections while leveraging those connections for modest social and economic advantages. Anne Louise's life likely involved the careful balance between acknowledging her superior birth and avoiding the attention that might bring unwanted scrutiny or political complications. Her fate during the Revolutionary period remains unknown, though her provincial position and relatively modest social profile may have provided protection from the persecution that affected more prominent members of the aristocracy. The discretion that had characterized her entire life would have been particularly valuable during the dangerous years when royal connections became liabilities rather than advantages. The limited historical record surrounding Anne Louise reflects both the successful maintenance of privacy that characterized arrangements for illegitimate royal children and the relatively minor role that most such children played in broader French political and social history. Among the most mysterious of Louis XV's probable illegitimate children are several daughters connected to the d'Estaing family, including one known as Aphrodite Lucie Auguste. These children represent the most carefully concealed relationships of the king's later years, when political circumstances made even greater discretion necessary regarding royal extramarital affairs and their consequences. The D'Estaing connection appears to involve a complex arrangement whereby children of uncertain but likely royal parentage were integrated into an established noble family through adoption or other legal mechanisms that provided them with respectable identities while completely obscuring their true origins. Such arrangements represented the most sophisticated level of royal discretion regarding illegitimate children. Aphrodite, Lucy Auguste, and her possible sisters were raised as members of the D'Estaing family, receiving education and social preparation appropriate to that status, while never acknowledging any connection to the royal family. This arrangement required extensive coordination between royal officials and the cooperating noble family, as well as careful financial arrangements to support the children's upbringing and future establishment. The success of these arrangements depended on absolute discretion from all parties involved, making historical verification extremely difficult. The existence of these children is suggested primarily by financial records and occasional references in private correspondence that hint at royal responsibility for children whose official identities provide no obvious connection to the monarchy. The D'Estaing daughters lived their entire lives as provincial nobles, participating in local society and marrying within their apparent social station without any public acknowledgement of possible royal heritage. This complete integration into non-royal identity represented the ultimate success of royal discretion policies, effectively severing any connection between these children and their probable royal father. Aphrodite, Lucy Auguste, and her sisters would have received education appropriate to minor provincial nobility, including basic literacy, domestic arts, and social graces sufficient for marriage within their adopted social sphere. Their lives would have been comfortable but modest, supported by the resources of their adoptive family and any discreet royal assistance that could be provided without revealing true relationships. Their marriages and adult lives followed typical patterns for provincial noble families, involving local social relationships and modest economic activities that maintained their social position while avoiding any circumstances that might draw unwanted attention or investigation. The success of their integration suggests careful, ongoing management to ensure that no circumstances arose that might reveal their hidden origins. The Revolutionary period may actually have provided these families with additional security, as the general disruption of traditional social relationships made genealogical investigations more difficult while reducing the significance of royal connections that had become dangerous rather than advantageous. The ultimate fate of these women remains largely unknown, which may represent the final success of the discretion policies that had governed their entire lives. Their story illustrates the most extreme measures that royal families might employ to manage the consequences of extramarital relationships while maintaining official family integrity. Amélie Florimond de Norville was born around 1754, another of the probable illegitimate daughters of Louis XV, whose existence reflects the complex social arrangements that characterized royal extramarital relationships during the mid-18th century. The surname de Norville appears to be another created identity designed to provide respectable noble status while concealing royal parentage through careful social management. Her birth and early upbringing were managed through the sophisticated network of arrangements that had developed to handle royal illegitimate children with maximum discretion. This system involved cooperation between court officials, carefully chosen noble families, and religious institutions that could provide appropriate education and social preparation while maintaining essential privacy. The timing of Amélie's birth during the 1750s coincided with a period when Louis XV was particularly concerned about maintaining discretion regarding his personal relationships. Political pressures and social criticism of royal behavior had made it increasingly important to avoid the kinds of public scandals that had sometimes surrounded earlier royal mistresses and their children. Amélie's education and social preparation followed the established pattern for illegitimate royal daughters, emphasizing accomplishments that would enable her to marry into the provincial nobility while maintaining the discretion that was essential to royal policy. This education included languages, literature, music, and domestic arts appropriate to her anticipated social position. As Amélie reached marriageable age, arrangements were made for her to marry into a provincial noble family that would provide social respectability while accepting the limitations associated with her uncertain parentage. These marriages typically involved careful negotiations to ensure that all parties understood the discrete nature of the relationships while providing modest financial arrangements to support the new household. Her marriage appears to have been successful in achieving the goals of royal policy regarding illegitimate children. Amélie integrated successfully into provincial noble society, participating in local social activities and raising children who might inherit some advantages from their royal ancestry while remaining far from centers of political power and potential controversy. The later years of Amélie's life coincided with the growing political tensions that would eventually lead to the French Revolution. Her provincial position and relatively modest social profile may initially have provided some protection from the political upheavals that were beginning to affect French society, though her noble status would eventually make her vulnerable to revolutionary persecution. Amélie died in 1794 during the height of the Revolutionary Terror, when noble birth had become a potentially fatal liability rather than a social advantage. The circumstances of her death are not clearly documented, but the timing suggests that she may have been among the many provincial nobles who were executed or died under the harsh conditions that characterized the Revolutionary period. Her death during the Terror illustrates the ultimate irony of the careful discretion that had characterized her entire life. The very noble status that had been created to provide her with respectable identity and social position became a source of danger during the Revolutionary period, when any connection to aristocracy could result in persecution and death. The story of Amélie Florimond de Norville demonstrates both the sophisticated social arrangements that characterized the old regime's approach to royal illegitimate children and the ultimate vulnerability of all aristocratic positions during the revolutionary transformation of French society. Louis-Marie de Narbonne-Lara was born on August 17, 1755, officially recognized as the son of the Duke and Duchess of Narbonne-Lara, though contemporary evidence strongly suggests that his true father was Louis XV. The circumstances of his birth and the special attention he received throughout his life indicate that he was likely another of the king's illegitimate children, carefully integrated into an existing noble family to provide him with respectable identity and social position. The Narbonne-Lara family was well positioned to provide cover for royal illegitimate children, as they possessed ancient nobility, court connections, and the discretion necessary for such delicate arrangements. The timing of Louis-Marie's birth, his physical resemblance to Louis XV, and the particular favor he enjoyed throughout his career all suggest royal parentage despite his official family identity. Unlike many of Louis XV's other illegitimate children, Louis-Marie was destined for a career that would bring him into direct contact with major political events and historical figures. His education and early opportunities were arranged to prepare him for significant roles in French society, suggesting that his probable royal father intended him to achieve greater prominence than was typically allowed for royal bastards. His upbringing combined the advantages of his official noble status with additional resources and connections that reflected probable royal support. This preparation enabled him to develop the intellectual abilities and social skills that would later make him an influential figure in French politics during one of its most turbulent periods. Louis-Marie de Narbonne-Lara embarked on a military career that brought him distinction during the final years of the old regime and continued through the revolutionary period. His service demonstrated both natural ability and the advantages that came from his probable royal connections, as he received appointments and advancement opportunities that reflected superior social position. His political career began during the early phases of the French Revolution, when his intelligence and diplomatic skills made him valuable to various political factions seeking to navigate the complex changes affecting French society. Unlike many aristocrats, he adapted successfully to revolutionary politics while maintaining his personal position and influence. In 1781, Louis-Marie was appointed Minister of War by Louis XVI, a position that placed him at the center of French military policy during one of the most critical periods in French history. His appointment reflected both his demonstrated competence and possibly the influence of his probable royal parentage, as Louis XVI may have felt additional confidence in someone who was likely his half-brother. His tenure as war minister was marked by efforts to modernize the French military while managing the complex political pressures that surrounded military policy during the early revolutionary period. He advocated for aggressive military action against European powers that threatened revolutionary France, positions that aligned with the nationalist sentiments that were becoming increasingly important in French politics. Following the fall of the monarchy and the execution of Louis XVI, Louis-Marie successfully transitioned to service under the new revolutionary government and later under Napoleon Bonaparte. His ability to adapt to changing political circumstances while maintaining his personal position demonstrated the political skills that had characterized his entire career. Under Napoleon, he received appointment as ambassador to Bavaria, a position that utilized his diplomatic abilities and aristocratic background in service to the new imperial system. His success in this role demonstrated how former aristocrats could find meaningful careers within the Napoleonic system while contributing to French national interests. His diplomatic career continued during the later years of the Napoleonic period as he served in various important positions that required both political skill and social sophistication. His background and abilities made him particularly valuable for assignments involving relationships with surviving European aristocrats and traditional monarchies. Louis-Marie died on November 17, 1813, during the final phase of the Napoleonic Wars, having successfully navigated the complete transformation of French society while maintaining his personal position and influence. His death came at a time when the old European order was beginning to reassert itself. Though he had demonstrated that adaptation and talent could enable even probable royal bastards to achieve significant careers under new political systems. His legacy includes his successful adaptation to revolutionary change and his demonstration that aristocratic background could be compatible with service to new political systems based on merit rather than birth. His career illustrated possibilities for reconciliation between old and new France that would later become important during the Bourbon Restoration. The probable royal parentage that had initially provided Louis-Marie with advantages ultimately became less important than his personal abilities and political adaptability, suggesting that the revolutionary transformation of French society had indeed created new opportunities for advancement based on individual merit rather than inherited status. Adélaïde de Saint-Germain was born around 1769, representing one of the latest probable illegitimate children of Louis XV, born during the final years of his reign, when the king was 59 years old. Her birth came during a period when royal extramarital relationships were conducted with even greater discretion than earlier, reflecting both the king's advancing age and increasing political pressures that made royal scandals particularly damaging. The surname de Saint-Germain appears to be another carefully constructed identity designed to provide respectable noble status while completely concealing royal parentage. The sophistication of these arrangements reflected decades of experience in managing royal illegitimate children and the development of increasingly effective methods for maintaining essential discretion. Her upbringing during the 1770s and 1780s coincided with the growing political tensions that would eventually lead to the French Revolution. This timing meant that Adélaïde's childhood was shaped by an atmosphere of uncertainty and change that would profoundly affect French society and create new challenges for people in her social position. The education and social preparation that Adélaïde received were designed to enable her to function successfully in whatever social and political circumstances might develop. This preparation proved particularly valuable given the dramatic changes that would transform French society during her lifetime, requiring adaptability and resourcefulness from all members of the aristocracy. As Adélaïde reached maturity during the revolutionary period, the traditional arrangements for marriage and social establishment that had governed the lives of earlier illegitimate royal children were no longer available. The transformation of French society required new strategies for social advancement and security, creating both opportunities and challenges for people with her background. Her marriage appears to have taken place during the Napoleonic period, when the new imperial system was creating opportunities for aristocrats who could adapt to changed political circumstances. The Napoleonic court valued both talent and social sophistication, making it possible for people with aristocratic backgrounds to achieve significant positions under the new regime. Adélaïde's role in Napoleonic society demonstrated the possibilities that existed for former aristocrats who could successfully adapt to the new political and social systems that emerged from the revolutionary transformation. Her probable royal ancestry may have provided certain social advantages while requiring careful discretion about connections that could still be politically sensitive. The Napoleonic period offered unique opportunities for women with aristocratic backgrounds and social skills to achieve influence and position within the new imperial system. Adélaïde appears to have successfully navigated these opportunities while maintaining the discretion that had been essential to her family's approach throughout her life. Adélaïde's long life, extending to 1850, enabled her to witness the complete transformation of French society from absolute monarchy through revolution, empire, restoration, and the July monarchy that followed the 1830 revolution. Her survival through all these changes demonstrated remarkable adaptability and probably considerable skill in managing social and political relationships. During the Bourbon restoration that followed Napoleon's defeat, Adélaïde's probable royal ancestry may have provided certain advantages, though the continued need for discretion about illegitimate royal children meant that these advantages had to be carefully managed. The restored monarchy was sensitive about acknowledging connections that might complicate official dynastic narratives. Her descendants appear to have successfully integrated into 19th century French society, achieving respectability and modest prosperity through careers and marriages that reflected their aristocratic heritage, while maintaining appropriate discretion about their possible royal ancestry. This successful integration represented the ultimate achievement of the discretion policies that had governed their family's approach for generations. The length of Adélaïde's life provided her with unique perspective on the dramatic changes that characterized French society during the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Her experience demonstrated both the vulnerability of aristocratic position during revolutionary periods and the possibilities for successful adaptation to new political and social circumstances. Her death in 1850 occurred during the July monarchy, when French society had achieved relative stability under a constitutional system that balanced traditional monarchy with democratic institutions. Her long life thus spanned the entire period of transformation that created modern France, while demonstrating the persistence of aristocratic families that successfully adapted to changed circumstances. The story of Adélaïde de Saint-Germain illustrates both the sophisticated social arrangements that characterized the old regime's approach to royal illegitimate children and the remarkable adaptability that enabled some aristocratic families to survive and prosper through the revolutionary transformation of French society. The sprawling family of Louis XV encompassed a remarkable range of human experiences, from the diplomatic marriages that shaped European alliances to the quiet religious devotion that sought meaning beyond worldly power. His 10 legitimate children with Queen Marie Leszczyńska, along with his various illegitimate offspring, created a complex web of relationships that touched every aspect of 18th century European society. Among the legitimate children, 3 distinct patterns emerged. Some, like Louise Elisabeth, Duchess of Parma, wielded significant political influence and shaped international relations through their marriages and diplomatic activities. Others, including the group known as Mesdames, Adélaïde, Victoire, and Sophie, remained at the French court and developed alternative forms of influence as unmarried princesses who preserved traditional monarchist culture. Finally, children like Louise found meaning through complete rejection of worldly concerns in favor of religious devotion. The most consequential legacy belongs to Louis, the Dauphin, whose 3 sons would all become kings of France. Louis XVI, whose inability to manage the revolutionary crisis ended absolute monarchy, Louis XVIII, who presided over the Bourbon Restoration, and Charles X, whose reactionary policies precipitated the final overthrow of the senior Bourbon line. Through the Dauphin's children, Louis XV's bloodline continued to influence French history well into the 19th century. The illegitimate children represent a different dimension of royal family life, illustrating the sophisticated social arrangements that the old regime developed to manage the consequences of royal extramarital relationships. From Louis-Aimé de Bourbon, who received official recognition and pursued an ecclesiastical career, to the carefully concealed daughters who lived quietly in provincial nobility, these children demonstrate the complex balance between royal responsibility and social discretion that characterized 18th century monarchy. The fates of Louis XV's children also illuminate the broader transformation of European society during their lifetimes. Those who died young, like Marie-Louise and Thérèse, were spared the trauma of witnessing the collapse of the social order into which they had been born. Those who lived through the revolutionary period faced choices between adaptation, resistance, and exile that defined their final years and ultimate legacies. Perhaps most significantly, the story of Louis XV's children reveals both the strengths and vulnerabilities of traditional monarchy in an age of increasing social change. Their successes in diplomacy, religious life, and cultural patronage demonstrated the positive contributions that royal families could make to European civilization. Simultaneously, their ultimate inability to prevent or successfully manage revolutionary transformation illustrated the limitations of traditional approaches to governance when confronted with fundamental challenges to social and political authority. The diverse paths followed by these children, from European throne rooms to Carmelite convents, from diplomatic councils to revolutionary emigration, encompass the full range of possibilities and dangers that characterized aristocratic life during one of history's most turbulent periods. Their collective story thus provides unique insight into both the grandeur and the fragility of the world that the Bourbon monarchy created and ultimately left behind.